A door closes. That's how the story begins. Not with violence. Not with a confrontation. Just a door closing. Soft. Deliberate. A sound so ordinary that most people wouldn't notice it. But in this story, that door closing was the beginning of the greatest organizational achievement in Harlem's criminal history. The date is March 12, 1952. Federal Courthouse, Manhattan. Bumpy Johnson is about to go to prison. 14 years. Federal conspiracy charge. Narcotics. He stands in the courtroom wearing an expensive suit, watching the judge pronounce his sentence with the certainty of a man who understands exactly what's about to happen. The bailiff approaches. "Time to go, Mr. Johnson." Bumpy nods. Not afraid. Not angry. Just resigned. He looks toward the gallery where his wife sits. Their eyes meet for exactly 3 seconds. That's all the communication they need. Then he's led away. Down the courthouse steps. Into a federal van. Heading toward Alcatraz. 40 years running Harlem. Gone. Just like that. Locked away. But here's the thing that nobody understood in that moment, not the judge, not the prosecutors, not the police watching from the gallery. Bumpy Johnson didn't stop controlling Harlem when he walked into that prison van. He never stopped. For the next 14 years, from inside a locked cell in Alcatraz, Bumpy Johnson maintained complete control of every numbers operation, every heroin distribution network, every protection racket, every major criminal enterprise in Harlem. Nobody knew how. Nobody could figure it out. The NYPD investigated. The FBI investigated. Local organized crime figures tried to understand the mechanism, tried to exploit the power vacuum, tried to move in and take over. All of them failed. All of them. Because Bumpy had created something invisible. Something that didn't require his physical presence. Something that functioned perfectly without him being in the room. He had created the silent partner system. And that system was so sophisticated, so mathematically perfect, so psychologically brilliant that it would become the blueprint for how every major criminal organization in America would eventually operate. This is the story of how a man in a locked cell controlled an empire from 3,000 miles away. This is the story of the invisible architecture of power. This is the story of Bumpy Johnson's greatest achievement, and it had nothing to do with violence. To understand how Bumpy maintained control from Alcatraz, you first need to understand what he was controlling. By 1952, Bumpy Johnson's criminal empire wasn't some loose collection of street hustlers and small-time operators. It was a sophisticated, multi-tiered, vertically integrated organization that would make Fortune 500 companies jealous. At the bottom level, street runners. These were young men, usually teenagers, who took bets on the numbers. They carried money door to door, collected from apartment buildings, small businesses, everywhere. These runners were completely expendable. They made about $15 a week. They got arrested constantly. Nobody cared if they went to prison because there were always more. Above the runners, collection houses. These were the heart of the operation. A collection house was typically a small office or basement room in a Harlem building. The runners brought their money here. It was counted, recorded, cross-referenced. If a runner was short, it was flagged immediately. If they were consistently short, they were removed. The collection houses operated on mathematical precision. Every dollar had to be accounted for. Every bet had to be recorded. Every transaction documented. Above the collection houses, the policy banks. These were the actual financial processing centers. The money came in from the collection houses, and here's where it was organized, sorted, prepared for distribution. The policy banks determined which numbers hit, calculated payouts, prepared the money for the next cycle. Above the policy banks, the area coordinators. These were the men who oversaw multiple policy banks, multiple collection houses, multiple runners across entire neighborhoods of Harlem. An area coordinator might oversee operations worth $500,000 per week. And above all of them, the inner circle. Marcus Webb, Illinois Gordon, Willie Lee, James Jackson. These were the men who reported directly to Bumpy. These were the men who knew the full scope of operations. These were the men who understood the system in its entirety. This entire structure, all of it, depended on perfect information flow. Messages had to travel up and down the chain. Instructions had to flow from the top. Problems had to be reported immediately. Decisions had to be made and communicated to everyone who needed to know. And Bumpy Johnson had to be at the center of all of it, even from 3,000 miles away in a locked cell on Alcatraz. Most criminal organizations would have collapsed immediately. The structure was too complex. Too many moving parts. Without the boss present, without his authority visible, the organization should have fractured into competing factions. It didn't. Instead, something remarkable happened. The organization functioned perfectly. Every day. Every week. For 14 years. How? The answer is, the silent partner system. Bumpy Johnson's first realization, the insight that separated him from every other criminal leader, was this: actual presence doesn't matter. Information matters. Most leaders think they need to be physically present to maintain control. They need to intimidate people in person. They need to make decisions face to face. They need to demonstrate power through visible authority. Bumpy understood something different. He understood that if you control the information, you control the behavior. Because fear is really just uncertainty. And uncertainty comes from not knowing what the boss knows. So Bumpy created a communication system that ensured one thing: everyone in his organization believed that he knew everything. The system worked like this. First layer, the eyes and ears. These were people nobody paid attention to. Shoe shine boys. Bartenders. Janitors. Church choir singers. Taxi drivers. Prostitutes. These were people embedded in every neighborhood, every business, every establishment. They saw things. They overheard conversations. They noticed patterns. These people reported to secondary contacts. Not directly to Bumpy, but to trusted intermediaries who compiled the information. What was stolen? Who was skimming? Which cop was taking bribes? Which area coordinator was cutting corners? Which runner was using the money to gamble instead of turning it in? All of this information was compiled daily. Written down in coded language. Hidden in newspapers or books or packages. Second layer, the delivery system. Bumpy had lawyers. Multiple lawyers. Defense attorneys, tax attorneys, business consultants. These lawyers visited Alcatraz regularly to discuss his legal cases. But inside their briefcases were also reports. Information. Updates on his operations. Bumpy also had family. His wife visited once a month. Guards allowed conjugal visits or near-conjugal visits for lifers. During these visits, information was exchanged. Spoken in codes. Hidden in letters sewn into clothing. He had a cousin who worked as a mail sorter at the Alcatraz facility. Nothing obvious. Just a job. But she had access to every piece of correspondence coming in and out. She could see who was getting messages. She could arrange for certain letters to arrive faster than others. Third layer, the outgoing communication. Bumpy's instructions had to flow back out to Harlem. How did this happen? Through the same channels, reversed. Messages hidden in legal documents. Coded language in letters to his wife that guards read but didn't understand. Instructions written in prisoner-to-prisoner communications that were allowed. But more cleverly, Bumpy didn't need to give detailed instructions. He had created a system that functioned on principles. Everyone in his organization knew the rules. Rule 1: every dollar is accounted for. Period. No exceptions. Rule 2: respect the boss. Always. Even when he's not present, especially when he's not present. Rule 3: report problems immediately. Don't try to solve them yourself. Report them. Rule 4: punishment is invisible. You never know when it's coming, but it will come. These rules were so deeply embedded in the organization that they functioned almost like gravity. People followed them not because Bumpy was watching, but because they understood that he was always watching, even from prison. In 1954, 2 years after Bumpy went to prison, a man named Charles "Big Charlie" Thompson decided to test the system. Big Charlie was an area coordinator in East Harlem. He oversaw about 40 collection houses and 300 runners. He was handling roughly $700,000 per week. One day, Charlie started to think, Bumpy's in Alcatraz. Bumpy's not coming out for 13 more years. Why am I sending all this money to a man who's locked away? Why don't I keep it? Charlie started small. Skimming 10% from one policy bank. Just one. Reporting the rest as if nothing happened. He made $7,000 in 1 week. That was more money than most people in Harlem made in a year. The next week, he did it again. And again. Over the course of a month, Charlie had stolen $28,000. He was confident. No one had caught him. Bumpy was in prison. The money was flowing. Everything seemed perfect. Then came the message. It arrived through multiple channels simultaneously. Through a lawyer. Through a piece of mail. Through a trusted intermediary who appeared at one of Charlie's collection houses. The message was simple: you stole $28,000. You have 48 hours to return it, or we'll assume you're trying to dissolve your partnership with the organization. Charlie's blood went cold. How did they know? How did they know the exact amount? How did they know so quickly? He had 3 choices. 1. Return the money, apologize, admit the theft, and hope for mercy. 2. Run. Disappear. Change his identity. Leave New York. 3. Fight. Try to hold on to the money and defend himself against whatever retaliation came. Charlie chose option 1. He returned the money immediately. All of it. Plus an additional 10% as a penalty. The next week, he was still in position. Still running his area. Still operating. But everyone in Harlem knew what had happened. Charlie Thompson had tried to steal from a man in prison, and that man had caught him across 3,000 miles, through walls, through time, through every obstacle. The message was clear: Bumpy Johnson's reach is infinite. 3 other area coordinators tested the system that year. 3 different ways. All 3 were caught within days. All 3 returned the money. All 3 learned the same lesson. By 1955, the system had solidified. Every person in Bumpy's organization understood that distance didn't matter. Prison walls didn't matter. Time didn't matter. Bumpy knew. Bumpy always knew. The organization was stronger than ever. What made Bumpy's system truly revolutionary wasn't just that it worked. It was the elegance of how it worked. Traditional criminal organizations rely on hierarchy and fear. The boss is visible. The boss is powerful. The boss can hurt you. So you obey. But Bumpy's system was different. It relied on something more subtle. It relied on uncertainty and mathematical inevitability. Here's how it worked. Every single transaction in Bumpy's organization was recorded. Not just the money. The names. The dates. The amounts. Everything. This information flowed constantly to the inner circle, and the inner circle reported to Bumpy. So Bumpy knew. Not through random chance. Through systematic information collection. He knew how much money moved through each collection house every single day. He knew if a runner was short by $5. He knew if a policy bank made a mathematical error. This wasn't paranoia. This was mathematics. If you collect information from every point in the system, you can identify anomalies instantly. A typical week, $1.2 million flows through Harlem's numbers operations. It arrives at collection houses as thousands of individual bets. These are consolidated into policy banks. The money is organized. Numbers are drawn. Winners are paid. Money is distributed. In a system this large, this complex, with this much money, small thefts are inevitable. A runner pockets $10 here. A collector takes $20 there. These things happen. But here's what most bosses don't understand: if you're paying attention to everything, you can see the pattern. You notice that runner 47 is consistently short by exactly $8 every week. That's a pattern. That's not coincidence. That's theft. You notice that policy bank 12 is reporting winning numbers that don't match the probability distribution. That's a mathematical anomaly. That's fraud. You notice that area coordinator 5 is having trouble accounting for $5,000 from 3 weeks ago. That's not a mathematical error. That's intentional. The system Bumpy created didn't need to catch every single theft. It didn't need to punish everyone immediately. It just needed to be comprehensive enough, detailed enough, that people understood they couldn't hide. And because people believed they couldn't hide, they didn't try. The system was self-enforcing through psychology, not through violence. Marcus Webb understood this better than anyone. When Bumpy was arrested, Marcus became the primary interface between Bumpy's ideas and the organization's implementation. Marcus would meet with area coordinators once a month. He would tell them, "We received 3 pieces of information this month about your collection houses. Want to know what they were?" He wouldn't tell them that the information came from Bumpy in prison. He would let them assume it came from anywhere. From spies. From the shoe shine boys. From the bartenders. From people they couldn't identify. The fear wasn't of Marcus. The fear was of the unknown. The fear was that somehow, somewhere, someone was watching. And that someone would report back to Bumpy. And Bumpy would know. When Bumpy Johnson was released from Alcatraz in 1966, he was 50 years old. He'd spent 14 years in prison. But his organization was stronger than ever. More importantly, he'd created a blueprint. Every major criminal organization in America learned from what Bumpy did. They understood that information systems matter more than physical presence. They understood that if you can see everything that happens in your organization, you can control it without being there. This principle extended far beyond organized crime. Corporate management theory, military strategy, government bureaucracy, every large-scale system eventually learned what Bumpy knew: that perfect information leads to perfect control. But there was something else Bumpy's system revealed. Something more important. It revealed that the greatest power isn't visible. The greatest power is invisible. Because the moment people know exactly how you're watching them, they can figure out how to evade you. But if they don't know how you're watching, if they can't see the system, if they can't understand the network of eyes and ears, then they become paralyzed by uncertainty. They assume you know everything. They assume you're watching everything. They assume that any deviation will be discovered. And because they believe this, they don't deviate. This is the ultimate form of control. Not through force. Not through violence. But through creating a system so comprehensive, so invisible, that people police themselves. The silent partner system wasn't just about drug trafficking and numbers running. It was about something fundamental to how human organizations function. It was about the principle that most people don't understand about power. Most people think power comes from being visible, from being strong, from being feared, from being able to hurt people. But Bumpy Johnson understood something different. He understood that the most powerful person in an organization isn't necessarily the one giving orders. Sometimes the most powerful person is the one who knows what information is being transmitted. The one who understands the full system. The one who can see patterns that others miss. In the military, they call this situational awareness. In business, they call this competitive intelligence. In criminal organizations, Bumpy called it the silent partner. The silent partner was the system itself. Not a person. A system. An invisible architecture of communication, information flow, and mutual accountability that functioned perfectly without the boss being present. But here's the truth that really matters. Every successful organization needs a silent partner. A system that works regardless of whether the leader is present. A system that functions through principles, not through personal authority. A system that's so well designed that people follow it even when nobody's watching. This is why Bumpy Johnson lasted 14 years in prison and still maintained complete control. This is why, when he got out, his organization was stronger than when he went in. This is why, decades later, people in Harlem still talked about how Bumpy Johnson never left. Even when he was locked away, he was everywhere. The silent partner made him invisible and omniscient at the same time. And that's a form of power that no gun, no amount of money, and no physical strength could ever replicate. The story of Bumpy Johnson's silent partner system isn't really a crime story. It's a story about human behavior. About how people respond to uncertainty. About how information creates control. About how the most sophisticated systems are often the ones you can't see. Bumpy Johnson went to prison in 1952. He emerged in 1966 with his power not diminished, but strengthened. Not because he had weapons or money. Not because he could intimidate people in person. But because he had created a system that worked without him. This is the true lesson of his legacy. Not that he was violent. Not that he was dangerous. But that he was brilliant. Brilliant enough to understand that real power isn't about being present. It's about being aware. It's about creating systems that function through principles, not through personalities. It's about building organizations that are greater than the person leading them. Bumpy Johnson spent 14 years in a cell. But he never left Harlem. Because Harlem was a system he had designed. And systems don't require bodies to function. They require only that people believe in them. And that belief, once established, is more powerful than any force in the world.